Good day. I am Ethan Jared Saquilayan. I am a graduate computer science major from De La Salle University, Manila, and I'm excited to share with you our study titled Welcome to Haraya, an English game-based learning environment for primary education students in the Philippines. I worked on this project with my thesis mates, Kyla, Bernadette, and Kielo, with the help of our professors, Sir Alen Mateo Munoz and Sir Ryan Dimaunahan, credible in both English studies and game development, respectively. Our work falls under the study of both educational technology and language teaching, focusing on the use of serious games, referred to as game-based learning environments, or GPLE in this study. Specifically, we look to reinforce the two following learning outcomes: to remember and apply arguments for a particular stance when they are identified in a scenario or situation, and organize arguments as for, against, or irrelevant upon being given a specific scenario and situation. These outcomes were decided as a basic reinforcement to persuasive essay writing through the understanding of argument sentences. Key points in this work will be the methodology and design considerations placed into the development of the GPLE and the results of our GPLE in teaching and engaging students. Our target participants were students from a research challenge school in the Philippines in Chican Elementary School. The motivation for this being the possibility of independent and engaging study for the students that reinforce their learning within class. The term serious game has been used since a paper by Abbott in 1970 that was titled as such, and studies surrounding it have had trouble defining what separates a serious game from one that is simply for entertainment. Given this focus on the design issues concerning serious games, we took a methodology from Season et al. 2018 called the Outcomes-Based Methodology. This method refers to the term GBL, or game-based learning, used by Schaffer, Squire, Halverson, and Gee to define a serious game as a game that has defined learning outcomes. As seen on the screen, this method starts with determining these outcomes, determining a genre, and after writing a preview, we go through the development cycle wherein our theoretical framework for the design of the game was Plass's design framework of engagement. This lists 4 perspectives in the development of mechanics with respect to player engagement, these being affective, motivational, cognitive, and social cultural, where balancing these 4 perspectives leads to an engaging educational game. We evaluate this engagement using the MEGA Plus Kids questionnaire, a derivative of the Game Flow questionnaire used for measuring the quality of engagement of a game. A quasi-experimental approach was taken for measuring the learning outcome achievement amongst the students, where testers were given a test before and after the playtesting, and scores were compared to see if learning was achieved. For teaching English to our target players, we found CLT, or communicative language teaching, to be suitable for our study. We also make use of the basic Tolman model for argument formulation to break down sentence arguments into 3 basic parts: the claim that the speaker refers to, the grounds that support this claim, and the warrant that connects them both through a known assumption. For a simple example, arguing for the presence of dogs in an area would mean the claim was that dogs were present. The grounds would be that you can hear them barking, and the warrant that connects both would be that upon hearing barking, that would mean there would be dogs around. Because of our choice of English teaching pedagogy, it is important now to explain visual novels, which is a kind of interactive fiction where dialogue is displayed along with the images of characters speaking and as well as changing backgrounds. This allows the player to interface with the world and feel as though they are truly interacting with the characters. We have also considered the learning gap concerning our subject is in the Philippines. Since COVID, a learning gap in English has been a cause of concern within Philippine schools, which was evidenced by the recent attainment of the lowest average English score in the Program for International Student Assessment. This learning gap, as reported by Desmond, also shows that up to 90% of Filipino children will still struggle to read simple texts. And since we have now gone through serious games and English teaching, we now have the basic building blocks of our reasons for performing this study, as well as our motivations to help teach students in research challenge schools. And before we tackle our methodology, let us go through our research question and specific objectives. The research question being, how can we rapidly develop an effective GPLE that achieves target higher order and lower order learning outcomes and retains engagement. Our objectives were to identify the higher and lower order outcomes for the grade 6 students, formulate the game mechanics based on our chosen pedagogical strategies and design considerations, design the GBLE that can teach the learning outcomes using the mechanics, make sure it is functional and playable, and finally, to evaluate its performance in teaching and engaging our target students. We will now dive into a 4-step methodology, which is the GPLE development, the participant selection, the quasi-experiment test, and then the analysis and discussion of our results. Starting off with our development, for most of the development process, we looked towards the outcomes-based methodology. Once again, for our development cycle, domain experts in both English and serious game development were consulted during the process. This was to ensure proper constraints in the game design space that gave the design process a specific direction. We would design visual prototypes of our desired game and game loop flows for our mechanics, and then try these and then integrate and then reset. This cycle would continue until we were able to integrate all elements and begin the playtesting of the game. But first, we had to select a genre. And the genre that we chose, because we had communicative language teaching as our pedagogical framework for teaching, it made sense to create a visual novel. Visual novels are how characters communicate with our player. Though the player does lack the dialogue choices due to the limitations of development, through the visual novel, they can see characters move, see visual backgrounds of their location, and they also provided light gibberish audio to play as the characters spoke to simulate speaking for a possible effective engagement among the students. However, this is merely our medium for exposing the players to the constant use of English inside the game. Our mechanics will revolve around this visual novel to create a narrative and a game at the same time. So it looks something like this. Players will first have to read through the visual novel, then they will be placed in the respective game mechanic. So for a lower order mechanic level, they would go through the visual novel, and then play through the lower order mechanic, and then end on a visual novel. And then the level will end, and then they can play a higher order level mechanic, and the same thing will occur. And now, presenting our game mechanics. This is our lower order game mechanic. It requires the player to read through argumentative claims between two different characters and see if the claims line up or are consistent with each other. These are written in such a way so that being inconsistent would mean that one's claim was against the subject, and being consistent would mean that one's claim was for the subject. As you can see, we go through the text, and we also have highlighted text that shows the player important terms that they will need to remember as a guide. The whole idea of this mechanic is to apply no arguments or stances to another stance, and through this application, they will be able to tell if something is to be continued or is inconsistent, or for and against. Next up will be our higher order mechanic, which is quite literally a sorting of arguments. We present the students with ground and warrant cards over a claim. The claim must be sorted as for, against, or irrelevant, and the fitting ground and warrant cards must be placed underneath a specific claim, building up an argument. For participant selection, we selected our participants from the school in Chican Elementary School. We also have an external set of players from varying schools, all of which are private school students. The ethics clearance for gathering our data was granted by De La Salle University's Research Ethics Office. And after the development of the game, we started the data gathering through a quasi-experiment, giving a pre-test to the students, an hour to play the game, and then giving them a post-test. And after that, they had to take the MEGA questionnaire to rate the game. The quizzes for the pre and post test are the same and were approved by our English domain expert before proceeding with our quasi-experiment. And to see if the data collected from the Chican students truly showed the game's efficacy, we also took the external group of students with varying English proficiencies to playtest the game. Since these are not our target test players for engagement, they were no longer provided the Mega Plus Kids test. And how we analyzed our results. We processed our data through a two-tailed t-test and a Wilcoxon rank test to see if there is a significant mean difference or a significant median difference. And then the difference in scores were then analyzed with a confidence level of 95% on a Mann-Whitney U test as well. And heading on to our results. The Inchican pre- and post-test scores for both the t-test and Wilcoxon test are at a confidence of 95% were found to be not significant for both the higher and lower outcomes. For both low medians, modes, and averages, the scores are greatly lower than the expected result. And for our Mika questionnaire, our lower and higher order games scored a good quality reading for both, which lines up with our thematic analyses, finding the students enjoying, engaged, and having fun with the game, despite needing to ask questions for some word definitions and difficulty understanding texts. Our external group testers did exceptionally better as expected. Their scores in both low and higher order mechanics were found to have a significant difference, which shows that learning did occur during their test. And when we saw that the scores for both the quasi-experiments were different, we chose to do the Mann-Whitney U test to compare both independent groups also at a 95% confidence level. And their scores are as follows. With a p-value of extremely less than 0.5, this shows that we reject the null hypothesis, and it shows a significant difference. Firstly, let's tackle the score of our target players, our Inchican students. Upon observation during playtesting, we found a general difficulty in understanding the texts and instructions found in the tutorial, despite it being approved to be suitable for grade 6 students. We believe it is possible that this is due to the learning gap, evidenced by test answers lacking in proper grammar, structure, and vocabulary, with essay prompts containing usually only one-sentence answers for the majority of the students. And though they were engaged in the playtesting, they would have trouble understanding instructions within the game and also within the tests. It's important to note as well that some were engaged by the characters and the story mostly due to the gibberish voices which they would mimic during testing, showing that having both visual and audio interactive measures within the game is important for effective engagement. Some were also focused on finishing levels before any of their friends, which shows that there is also an avenue for socio-cultural engagement. Other students were fully focused on the game and trying their best to complete the levels, which shows a level of cognitive engagement. However, after a time, especially when losing levels, it was difficult to maintain a motivation to read the story after finishing a previous level, which is something that may need to be addressed in future study. Moving on to the significant increase of score between the pre- and post-test of the external group. Despite having a much greater score than the Inchican students, there's evidence that there was learning gained in the playtesting, and not just an increase in score. This ended up lining up with our goal of reinforcing learned topics, as we had found that since the students had just graduated from the 5th grade, they had not yet been exposed to persuasive writing, as there are no topics about it at grade 5. This shows that the GBLE can indeed teach, provided the student has sufficient background understanding to reinforce. However, some alterations may be needed, as the ultimate goal must be to teach a general set of students. It is also possible that because of the learning gap, the students' reading comprehension had not reached a suitable level for our game's vocabulary, despite it being designed mainly for grade 6 students. Going on to our implications, our results imply that our GBLE can reinforce learning, but it seems there is a need to design more ways to guide the student through scaffolding so that we can teach a wider audience. The GBLE was indeed able to engage the students, showing an ability to teach language learning while being engaging, and the ability of the external players to score high with a given level of vocabulary is expected due to their age and greater experience in English. However, this may mean that we may have to lower the grade level of the game's vocabulary to accommodate other students. They also showed a significant amount of learning during the test, which shows that our game can indeed reinforce knowledge. Given our results, we recommend improving engagement and learning through the use of more illustration and possibly voice acted text. This is to create a visual audio connection with what we are teaching the students, which may improve engagement. And since the context will be related with our subject, testing may take place to see if it does improve learning. We also found that healthy competition helps keep players engaged, and since English is a communicative language, to further expose and learn, we believe it may be beneficial to include more opportunities for players to engage with one another through possibly a multiplayer system or a leaderboard, as most of our engagement occurred amongst the students when they were trying to compare their scores. And lastly, as mentioned earlier, mechanic additions via scaffolding may be useful in teaching the mechanic. Slowly ramping up the difficulty of the GBLE may create a fitting and challenging experience that does not frustrate the student. This may require a longer and more thorough development and design loop. And finally, as our game is developed to reinforce the learning outcomes, teacher intervention may be able to create a more personal and thorough experience for the student, where the lessons may be integrated with the GBLE and learning can be supervised for the student. And that is it for our presentation. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.